the infertile bride sent away in shame, and the secret waiting behind the cowboy's door. That morning, Silver Creek buzzed like a hornet's nest. Folks gathered on porches, behind lace curtains, at the swinging doors of the saloon, all waiting for a show. Clara Whitfield, the woman branded with every cruel word a town could conjure, barren, cursed, a burden, was about to be sent off. Where? To the one place no one in Silver Creek ever cared to go. The ranch of Ethan Monroe, the man who buried himself in grasslands and grief, clinging to the memory of a wife and child long gone. To the townsfolk, this was the neatest solution: hide away two people they no longer wanted to see. But what no one knew was that behind that weather-worn door, a secret waited, one that would change both their fates forever. That morning in Silver Creek, the air itself seemed to carry gossip. Sunlight spilled over the dusty street where every window cracked open to watch. Clara Whitfield stood stiff on the boarding house porch, hands locked tight on the straps of her worn leather boot, eyes set on the horizon, though she knew every pair of eyes was fixed on her. They didn't look with pity. They looked with judgment, the gaze of people convinced they held the right to decide another's destiny. Whispers swirled. A young widow, never bore a child, nothing but a burden. Another voice hushed but sharp enough to cut. Word is, she's to be married off to Ethan Monroe, that recluse out past the valley, just him, his horses, and the ghosts of his dead wife and son. The laughter that followed, half mocking, half delighted, landed on Clara's shoulders like stone, but colder still was the rumor drifting through the crowd. The preacher arranged it, wants to cover up last year, when Charles Everett courted her, then fled once he learned she was barren. That truth struck like a blade. Clara bit her lip until blood touched her tongue, but her face showed no tremor. She'd grown used to swallowing shame, to standing as the town's joke. Behind her came the step of Martha, her sister-in-law. The woman's voice held a thread of pity. Take it as fortune, Clara. Ethan Monroe needs a home. You need a roof, that's enough. Clara gave no answer. Neighbors, kin, even strangers lined the street, waiting for her to break. For a flicker of a moment, Clara remembered herself years ago, standing in a church, young and hopeful, believing love would be her shield. Now that same church had become the judge's bench, sending her off like some unwanted thing. Mercy, no. This was punishment dressed up as grace. A dry wind swept through, tossing strands of hair into her eyes. Clara drew a breath, lifted her chin. Her heart trembled, but her gaze turned to iron. They could call her a burden, but she swore she would not be broken. If fate had written her off, then she'd rewrite it herself. And those whispers about the preacher, about hidden sins, Clara knew too well. This was only the opening act of a much longer play, and she, unwilling or not, had been cast as the lead. Wagon wheels crunched down the rutted road, dust turning to mud under a sudden lash of rain. Clara sat stiff in the back of old Pete's wagon, clutching her bag as each jolt bruised her spine. Pete said little, just cast her a look, part pity, part avoidance. The road stretched 10 miles, but to Clara it felt like a sentence dragging her toward a prison. When the horses halted before a sagging wooden gate, her chest clenched. The ranch loomed like a ghost, a house darkened by time, paint peeling from the porch, barns leaning, fences scarred with rot. No laughter, no sound, but the wind howling through cracks in the boards. Clara stepped down into the mud, skirt dragging, heels sinking. The door creaked open. He filled the frame like he'd been carved from the land itself. Ethan Monroe. Tall, broad-shouldered, his face cut by years of storm and sun, eyes gray as a winter sky. His gaze stopped her cold, seeing through her, yet seeing nothing at all. No greeting, no smile, no surprise. Only a measuring look, Then a voice, gravel rough, striking like a hammer. "This ain't marriage, just work and a roof." The words fell colder than the wind. Clara's grip tightened on her bag. Her spine straightened. The town's sneers rang in her ears, threatening to crush her before she'd even crossed the threshold. But instead of bowing her head, Clara lifted it. Her eyes burned bright with something unyielding. "I understand," she said, voice steady. But deep inside, Clara swore an oath. This fate would not define her. If they wanted her discarded, she'd turn this barren land into proof that even a woman called useless could carve her worth into the earth. Ethan shrugged, as though none of it mattered, and stepped back into the shadows of the house. Clara stood there, soaked through, standing at the edge of a beginning as harsh as it was unpredictable. If it were you in this moment, whose side would you take? A. Clara Whitfield. B. Ethan Monroe. Or would you choose differently? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I'll be watching to see who's still with this story. The first days at the Monroe Ranch dragged on like a slow, suffocating hymn. The old wooden house lay smothered in dust, its windows dim, its kitchen colder than if fire had been banished for years. Clara stepped inside, her hand brushing across tabletops thick with grit, a film of ash clinging to the shelves as though she were touching a memory left for dead. Each morning, as dawn light slanted in, Clara lit the fire with her own hands, boiled water, cleaned every corner. She scrubbed floors until her palms split, tugged rotting cloth from forgotten shelves, and cleared soot from the hearth. Outside, the wind moaned across the porch, and from the barn came the iron rhythm of Ethan's horse, steady, distant, as cold as the man himself. He returned only at mealtimes, never to sit at her table. Instead, he chose the chair on the porch, eating in silence, leaving Clara alone with the empty room. The back garden was no better than a forsaken graveyard, soil cracked, weeds choking, vines strangling the broken fence. Yet Clara rolled up her sleeves, pulling weeds, striking the ground with her hoe. Her back ached, her palms blistered, but each drop of sweat that fell was her way of daring fate to break her. One afternoon, while sweeping a dim hallway, Clara noticed a door unlike the others. The lock was rusted, the knob thick with dust, as though untouched for years. Instinct told her something waited behind it. She searched for a key, tried, twisted, until at last the hinges groaned open with a shiver down her spine. By lantern light, she froze. The room stood preserved in time, dresses folded on a chair, a spool of thread left half-wound, a family portrait leaning on the desk. Dust covered everything, yet it all remained as if the owner had just stepped away. Clara felt as though she'd walked into a tomb. This was Sarah's room, Ethan's late wife. The weight of it pressed the air from her chest. She stepped back, heart pounding, realizing the silence of this house wasn't born of emptiness. It was built from grief never buried. When the door closed again, Clara lingered in the dark. Part of her wanted to flee, but another part stirred. Curiosity mixed with empathy. If Ethan had kept this room untouched, it meant he had never truly let go. And Clara knew, in opening that door, she had touched a wound not yet healed, a wound certain to summon storms. That night, the skies over Silver Creek churned with fury. Snow fell so thick it swallowed sound, leaving only the shriek of wind battering the wooden walls. The roof creaked, as if ready to splinter, while the fire's glow was the lone defense against the dark. Clara huddled in a thin blanket by the hearth, shivering as the cold knifed through every crack. Ethan's footsteps thudded, heavy and certain. He entered carrying a log, firelight painting his weathered face. He glanced at Clara, then placed the wood on the flames. The fire roared up, throwing red across his gray eyes suddenly softened. "You'll freeze in that back room by morning," he muttered, pulling another blanket and laying it across the other side of the fire. "We'll stay here, by the heat." Clara hesitated, then nodded. The hearth became a fragile border, keeping them apart, yet binding them inside the same circle of warmth. Their breaths mingled with the storm's howl outside. Silence stretched long, until Ethan spoke, voice low and hoarse, as though the storm itself forced him to let words out. "Sarah, my wife. She loved storms like this," he said, gaze drifting. "She'd say the wind's cry was proof God still moved out there. But me, all I hear is what I've lost." Clara turned, watching the fire throw his shadow, tall and trembling, against the wall. She drew a breath and answered softly, "They call me barren. That word, it's a knife. It cut away everything I thought I could ever give." Her voice cracked, her hand clutching the edge of her blanket. Ethan shifted, his gray eyes meeting hers. In that moment, it wasn't a man and an unwanted widow staring across a fire. It was two wounds facing each other, one who had lost life he once held, and one stripped of the right to ever create it. "Not bearing children," he said quietly, "don't make you less than any woman. Sarah lost 2 before Tim was born. Near broke her. But it didn't make her less." Those words lit a second fire inside Clara's chest. For the first time, someone saw her not through contempt, but as human. Her eyes brimmed, a hot tear slipping across her hand. In that narrow ring of firelight, they sat in silence. But it was no longer the silence of walls and distance. It was the silence of recognition, of something fragile just planted. A seed of trust, taking root between two souls thought burned to ash. If you were here, whose side would you take? A. Clara Whitfield. Ethan Monroe. Or would you choose differently? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I'll be watching to see who's still with this story. That night, the storm rose wild again. Wind screamed through the mountain gaps like war trumpets, hurling snow against the wooden walls. Clara sat close to the fire, arms wrapped tight around herself, listening to the gale's haunting cry. Ethan was outside, fighting to bar the stable doors before the storm ripped the roof away. Through the roar of nature came another sound, faint, trembling, almost imagined. A knock. At first a timid tap, then harder, desperate. Clara stiffened, heart pounding. Who could be wandering in a blizzard like this? She snatched the oil lamp and pulled the bolt. The door flung open, snow and wind bursting in, nearly killing the flame in her hand. Out of the white void stumbled a frail figure, a young woman, hair tangled, face bloodless, lips gone blue. In her shaking arms was a small bundle wrapped in a thin blanket. "Please, ma'am, take my child." Her voice broke into ragged gasps, eyes cloudy yet burning with a last plea. Clara lunged forward just as the girl collapsed, the bundle falling into her arms. The blanket slipped back to reveal a newborn's tiny red face. A weak cry pierced through the storm, striking Clara's heart like an arrow. "Who are you?" Clara cried, but the girl was fading fast. "Mary Sullivan," she whispered, each word tearing her lungs. "Raise him. Don't let him be alone." Then, on that very threshold, her body went slack, breath stilled, eyes closing forever. Clara froze, stunned. Snow drifted inside, burying Mary's dark hair. But in Clara's arms, life still kicked, still wailed to live. Something sharp and aching tore open in Clara, something she thought had been stolen from her, forever. The instinct of a mother. She pressed the baby to her chest, tears spilling, mingling with sweat and cold. The tiny body shivered, then quieted, soothed by the warmth of a woman who had lost everything, yet been handed a new reason to live. Ethan stormed in from the snow, coat frosted white, eyes narrowing at the sight. Mary lifeless at the door, Clara kneeling with a crying child against her heart. He started to speak, then stopped when Clara lifted her gaze, terror and unshakable resolve blazing in her eyes. The storm outside still howled, but inside that small wooden house, another storm had begun, one that would change all 3 lives forever. By morning the blizzard broke, but the weight over the Monroe Ranch was heavier than ever. Behind the house a fresh grave stood, marked by a plain wooden cross. Mary Sullivan, the girl who spent her last breath placing her child in a stranger's hands. Clara stood before the grave, cloak dusted in frost. The baby, Samuel, nestled in her arms. He stirred now and then, tiny fists clutching her sleeve as though clinging to a lifeline. Tears rolled down Clara's cheeks, not only for Mary, but for herself, a heart once branded useless, now filled by the cry and breath of a child. Ethan lingered back, broad shoulders rigid in the wind. He did not weep, but his eyes were heavy, watching Clara cradle Samuel with a tenderness that stirred something long buried. Memories of Sarah and the boy he once held the same way. "What do you plan to do?" Ethan's voice rumbled from deep in his chest. Clara wiped her tears quickly. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know this. I won't abandon this child. Mary gave him to me, and I'll keep that promise." Her voice steadied, though her hands still trembled. A long silence. Then Ethan stepped closer, calloused hands reaching out. He took Samuel, lifting him as if cradling the whole world. The infant blinked, dark eyes wide, then quieted, as if safe in the arms of the lonely man. "The boy needs a home," Ethan said softly. "And we have one." Clara tightened her arms around Samuel, feeling that fragile warmth string itself to her trembling heart. Across from her, Ethan's gray eyes, usually cold, now carried something else. A light, both gentle and fierce. He set his rough hand on the table, voice rasped by the wind of the west. "We can't stay silent, Clara. This child didn't just show up by chance. Someone put him at our door, knowing we'd find him." Outside, the wind of Silver Creek hissed through the cracks, carrying the smell of wet earth and the distant pound of hooves. Clara held her breath. Already rumors in town were flying, that the barren widow had suddenly taken in a child. The gossips would not leave them in peace. But a darker fear crept in. Clara remembered the cloth that wrapped the baby, an old blanket stitched in red thread, a broken arrow. Ethan had once spoken, in rare moments of openness, about a mountain gang called Broken Arrow. They were known for stealing guns, gold, and children. Ethan's jaw set. If it's them, this child is more than innocent. He's a witness, proof, and a target. Clara shivered, clutching tighter as though the shadows themselves might snatch him away. Yet in Ethan's eyes, she saw no pity, only belief. Belief that she could stand beside him, guarding this fragile life. That night, rain hammered Silver Creek, drumming the wooden roof. Clara rocked the baby to sleep while Ethan sat at the window, rifle across his knees, his shadow stretched long in lamplight, like a wall between his small family and the dangers outside. At midnight, hooves stopped at the gate. Clara startled, clutching the child. Ethan raised a finger to his lips, then eased the curtain aside. 4 figures cloaked in black stood in the rain. One lifted a torch high, its fire glaring against the little house. "They're here," Ethan murmured. Clara's heart dropped into an abyss. Yet along with fear came something stronger. The moment she took the baby in her arms, she had become a mother. And a mother will fight to the end, even against the whole Broken Arrow gang. The house, frail against the storm, now glowed with the ember of a coming battle. And in that cold rain, Clara understood. Fate had not cast her out to be abandoned. It had placed her here to be the fire that kept a home alive, even with wolves circling in the dark. If it were you, whose side would you take? A. Clara Whitfield. B. Ethan Monroe. Or would you choose differently? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I'll be watching to see who's still with this story. News traveled faster than the wind in Silver Creek. Only weeks after Clara carried the baby into church at Ethan's side on Sunday, the whole town was ablaze with rumor. Folks didn't care where Samuel truly came from, nor did they want an explanation. All they saw was a widow once branded barren, now holding a child, and they wasted no time painting her with cruel tales. At the general store, women whispered behind the flour sacks, "She must have been sneaking around before. Maybe that child's Ethan's." Outside the saloon, laughter rang. "Turns out Monroe ain't so barren after all. Just hiding it well." Every word cut Clara deep as she passed. Samuel pressed close against her chest. Clara chose silence. She was used to contempt, believing time would prove her. But her silence only fanned the fire. Some even claimed Mary, the girl who died in the storm, was nothing but a cover story, made up to legitimize the baby. On market day, Clara walked beside Ethan to town for salt, cloth, and medicine for Samuel. The stares closed in on them, whispers loud enough to sting. Clara lowered her head, heart twisting, trying to slip through, but Ethan stopped. He stood in the square, tall frame casting a shadow across the sun-spotted ground. His gray eyes swept the crowd. Samuel stirred in Clara's arms. The town held its breath. Ethan drew a long breath, then spoke, his voice like a hammer blow. "This is my family. Anyone's got a problem. They'll face me." The words rang out. Strong, final. Not explanation, not excuse. A declaration, a warning, a challenge. Silence thickened. Whispers choked off. Smirks vanished. Clara froze. She turned to Ethan, saw the hard edges of his face, but in his eyes a glimmer of something deeper. Protection. For the first time, she was not alone against the scorn. For the first time, someone stood with her. When they left the square, the whispers had not vanished, but they'd lost their teeth. Clara walked at Ethan's side, heart swelling with a strange new feeling. Belonging, however fragile. But Silver Creek's gossip never slept. That very afternoon, a stranger rolled in on an old wagon. A woman, wrapped in a road-stained cloak. Within hours, her name was on every porch and parlor, Mrs. Green. She was no loudmouth, but her words dripped like oil into fire. At the water trough she said, as though offhand, "I knew Clara Whitfield back east. She was with child once, but that baby never came." The town gasped, then feasted. Soon the tale twisted. Clara hiding a shameful past. Her family casting her out. Whispers turned to laughter. Laughter to scorn. Clara heard it all. Each step down the street felt like walking barefoot on thorns. Samuel slept softly in her arms, but the whispers tore at her heart. This time they were not just cutting her, they were tainting the innocent. Ethan noticed too. One evening, leading his horse to water, he overheard drunks chuckling. "Maybe little Samuel's just the ghost of the babe Clara lost. Two-faced woman." His hands clenched the reins, veins standing out. He nearly struck them, but knew a fight would only feed the blaze. That night, the hearth crackled, throwing their shadows against the rough wooden wall. Samuel breathed softly in Clara's arms, but in her chest, a storm raged. The names, barren bride, stray child, cut invisible scars. She closed her eyes, feeling every word sear into her skin. Ethan crossed the room, set a calloused hand on her shoulder. His mountain-cold eyes burned now with something else. Resolve. "Clara," he said, voice gravelly but firm. "I've faced storms, men with guns and blood on their hands. The only thing I've feared losing is this home. You and the boy. You're everything." Clara trembled, not knowing if from fear or from the weight of those words. The pain of being cast out, cursed by the town, gave way to something fragile but fierce: trust. But just as the spark caught, hoofbeats rolled through the night. The glass panes rattled. Ethan grabbed the rifle by the window, peered out. Moonlight revealed 4, maybe 5 riders cloaked in black, motionless on their horses. Torches flared in their fists, flames licking the rain. And on one banner burned a mark, a broken arrow. Clara's heart seized. The same mark had been stitched into Samuel's blanket. Ethan's warning thundered in her mind. Broken arrow. Then came the pounding, hard, merciless, like a judge's gavel. Samuel woke, wailing. Clara clutched him close, body taut. Ethan's eyes were sharp as steel. "They're not here to talk. They're here to take him back." "Ethan, what do we do?" Clara gasped. He drew a breath, hand firm on the rifle stock. "We fight. Not for honor, not for Silver Creek, for this home, for the boy." Outside, horses shrieked. Men shouted. A voice rasped through the door. "Return what isn't yours, and no one dies." Clara turned to Ethan, fear and fire mingling in her eyes. There was no going back. Tonight, in this small wooden house on the edge of Silver Creek, they would stand, not only against cruel whispers, but against the Broken Arrow gang come to claim their prize. The hearth roared, no longer just warmth against the winter, but a beacon against the dark, a flame that would decide all their fates. If it were you, whose side would you take? Oh. Clara Whitfield. Ethan Monroe. Or another choice? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I'll be watching to see who's still with this story. Spring came, the snow melting into streams around the hills, but the air at the Monroe Ranch did not thaw. One morning, as Clara hung Samuel's cloth diapers on the porch line, the sharp sound of unfamiliar hooves echoed down the dirt road. A carriage appeared, sleek black paint, iron-bound wheels gleaming. Nothing like it had ever rolled into this barren land. It stopped at the ranch gate. Clara froze, her hand tightening on the cloth. A knot of dread gripped her chest. From the barn, Ethan stepped out, tall frame cutting the light, eyes narrowing as a well-dressed man in a heavy suit climbed down. The stranger dusted his leather gloves, smiling like the world itself belonged to him. "Jonathan Hale," he announced, voice loud and commanding. He produced a packet of papers, stamped with a red seal. "I've come to claim my son." Clara clutched Samuel tighter, her body trembling. "Your son?" Hale nodded, calm as if making a business deal. "Indeed. Here's the birth certificate. My name, Jonathan Hale. The boy is my blood, my rightful heir. I can give him everything, fine homes, the best schools, a future of honor. And you," his eyes flicked over Clara with contempt, "you're just a poor widow, unfit to raise him." Clara went pale. The rumors in Silver Creek felt like knives again, driven deeper. If his papers were real, how could she protect Samuel? Ethan stepped forward, placing himself between Hale and Clara. His voice was low, sharp as steel. "The boy has a home, and he don't need a future bought in gold." Hale laughed, a booming, cold laugh. "You think love can feed a child? Will you fill his belly with dust from this broken ranch? Don't forget, the law is on my side." Ethan said nothing, fists clenched, fury burning in his eyes. Samuel whimpered in Clara's arms, sensing the storm around him. Clara's heart thundered, torn between fear and despair. Hale adjusted his hat, straightened his collar, and stepped back into his carriage. "I'll give you a few days. Prepare yourselves. In court, no amount of affection will outweigh a signature and a seal." The wheels ground forward, leaving dust swirling in the spring wind. Clara wept softly into Samuel's hair. Ethan stood silent, gaze locked on the road, as if swearing already. If this was a fight, he would not yield. The day of trial came. Nearly all of Silver Creek crowded into the red brick courthouse at the center of town. From gossiping seamstresses to idle cowboys, everyone wanted to see the showdown. A wealthy merchant against the reclusive couple from the valley. Whispers filled the chamber, tension stretched tight as wire. Jonathan Hale sat at the plaintiff's table, his tailored suit gleaming among the town's worn coats. Beside him, a city lawyer strutted with arrogance, his voice ringing out. He painted a glittering picture. Samuel deserves prestigious schools, a grand home, a future bright with opportunity. Every word dripped with disdain for Clara and Ethan's poverty-stricken affection. Across the room, Clara cradled Samuel, hands shaking, but her eyes firm. Ethan sat beside her, back straight as a board, gray gaze fixed on the bench. When called, their witnesses stood. The town doctor spoke of Clara's sleepless nights nursing Samuel through fever. Neighbor Mrs. Morrison recalled Ethan carrying Clara and the child across a snowstorm for medicine. Their words were plain, but rich with truth, stories of sacrifice, of love. The crowd stirred. People who once mocked Clara shifted uneasily, doubt seeping in. But Hale's smirk never wavered. When his lawyer laid out the documents, it seemed the scales tipped back toward wealth and power. Then the old preacher rose, hands trembling as he held a folder. "Your Honor," he said, voice unsteady but clear, "there is a truth that cannot be ignored." The room went silent. The papers were from Kansas, Hale's past. They revealed he had once been sued for abusing his wife and child, even facing a restraining order. Gasps erupted, the crowd exploding in whispers, but now aimed not at Clara, at Hale. The judge's gavel thundered. His voice rang firm. "Mr. Hale's motives are not paternal, but financial. With this evidence, the court denies his claim. Samuel will remain with Clara and Ethan Monroe." Clara broke down in tears, clutching Samuel. Ethan wrapped his arm around her, his face stern but eyes glinting with relief. Across the room, Jonathan Hale flushed red, then stormed out under the scorn of the townsfolk. That day, Silver Creek witnessed more than a trial. They witnessed love triumph over wealth, sacrifice over greed. And from the moment Samuel was declared theirs, Clara and Ethan knew they had weathered the fiercest storm of their lives. If it were you, whose side would you take? A. Clara Whitfield. B. Ethan Monroe. Or another choice? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I'll be watching to see who's still with this story. The wedding came faster than Clara ever imagined. Only weeks after the trial that shook Silver Creek, the church bells rang bright across the valley. The same townsfolk who once mocked her now crowded in to witness. On many faces, curiosity had been replaced with admiration, and perhaps a trace of envy. Clara stepped out from the small room behind the chapel. Her dress was simple blue, pure and modest, hugging her slender frame. No silk or lace, but every stitch sewn by her own hands and Mrs. Morrison's. Night after night, sunlight streamed through the church glass, making the fabric shimmer like a spring lake. In her hair, she wore sprigs of white wildflowers, the only things hardy enough to bloom in this harsh land, proof that beauty could rise from barren soil. At the end of the aisle stood Ethan. His black coat couldn't hide the nerves beneath. But what made the crowd fall silent was Samuel. The boy resting in his arms, swaddled in a new white blanket, cheeks rosy, eyes wide and bright. The sight of the once lonely recluse holding a child close to his chest, waiting for the woman the whole town had once scorned, was enough to shatter every whisper of ridicule. As Clara entered, murmurs rippled, but softer this time. "She looks beautiful," someone breathed. "Never seen Monroe's eyes shine like that." Another nodded. Admiration spread like wildfire, filling Clara's chest with a mix of gratitude and awe. The preacher's voice rang warm, reading the vows. Outside, wind stirred through the windows, carrying the scent of damp earth and wildflowers. Clara placed her hand in Ethan's rough palm. When asked, both spoke their vows, short, firm, like two survivors of storms now choosing to walk the road together. When the preacher declared them husband and wife, cheers thundered. The old rafters shook with applause. Mrs. Morrison wept openly. The town doctor smiled, and those who once spat venom were forced to bow their heads, swallowing their words. On the church steps, beneath the blazing gold of late afternoon, Clara, Ethan, and Samuel stood as one. Clara leaned against her husband's shoulder. Samuel gurgled in Ethan's arms. From the barren widow and the lonely man, they had become a family. And in that moment, before all of Silver Creek, their picture outshone any gilded promise Jonathan Hale had ever boasted in court. That evening, Silver Creek quieted under an unusual calm. The cheers faded, leaving only crickets in the fields and the crackle of firelight. Clara sat in their small room, newly dressed for the wedding, eyes roaming the white curtain, the wooden table with wildflowers. Her heart still trembled. How a day, once marked by shame, had turned into a joy, witnessed by the very people who had condemned her. Ethan entered, holding something wrapped in old cloth. Firelight flickered across his face, his gray eyes softer than she'd ever seen. He sat beside her and placed the bundle in her hands. "There's something I want you to keep." Clara unwrapped it. A leather-bound journal, edges yellowed with age. She turned a few pages, slanted handwriting, gentle and graceful, a woman's hand. She knew at once, Sarah's, Ethan's first wife. The first pages spoke of afternoons sewing dresses, of dreams that her husband might not be left alone through so many winters. Near the end, Clara's hands shook as she read, "If one day I am no longer here, my last wish is that Ethan will not close his heart. He deserves someone strong enough to keep the fire alive in this house. Don't let it burn out like a candle in the wind." Clara's throat caught, tears blurring her sight. Ethan did not look at her. His gaze stayed on the flames. His voice was low, rough. "I've kept it all this time, but tonight, I believe Sarah would want you to carry it forward." In that moment, all the weight of curses, of being branded barren, of cruel gossip, fell away. Her place here, her love for Samuel, the storms weathered with Ethan, none of it was punishment. It was destiny. Clara closed the journal, laced her fingers into Ethan's. "We'll keep this fire alive. For Sarah, for us, and for Samuel." Ethan nodded, gray eyes lit with a rare certainty. That night, they sat long beside the fire, Samuel sleeping in his small cradle. Outside, the western sky stretched endless, glittering with stars. On the porch of that weathered house, 3 broken pieces, Clara, Ethan, and Samuel, had fused into a home. Not a gift from society, but one they had chosen, forged, and would protect with everything in them. Beneath the wide western sky, Clara, Ethan, and Samuel's journey closed not with loss, but with proof that love and choice can mend wounds once thought beyond healing. From a scorned widow, a lonely man, and an orphaned child, a family was forged through grit and grace. Perhaps all of us, at some point, carry scars, bear losses, but this story reminds us, sometimes destiny's greatest gift comes disguised in storms. What about you? Would you have the courage to believe in a new beginning? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more heartfelt stories like this one.